Hello everyone, this is Panera here with an episode of Anatomy of StarCraft, and actually this is one that I'd really like to get a response from Blizzard on. Now, I'm not going to put them down or anything like that, but and I wasn't actually going to get into this Project Blackstone publicity stuff, but a friend of mine named Rune Katashima, now known as Razgriz or something like that, pointed out to me that they have recently updated about Mutalisks. So I read through there a little bit, and basically there's an issue that I have. And this is really, really, really simple. I mean, with today's education systems and the ability to use Wikipedia and Google, there's quite simply no excuse for this magnitude of an error, I suppose. So basically, I'll read to you the issue that I'm having, and you can kind of follow along with me. I'll have pictures and stuff up as well. Basically, there's a discussion between this T. Kogan and T. Ayers. And they're talking about, okay, what is the foremost expert on Mutalisk sent us? A Mutalisk seems the obvious answer. Blah, blah, blah. Have you ever dissected a Mutalisk? No, but oh yeah, right. Volatile, acidic hemoglobin. Okay. And then they go on to say that the professor's chosen field of study keeps dissolving right in front of his eyes. Okay. I'm going to give you guys a fairly simple rundown about what's going on here and how really this could have been avoided. We'll start off with talking about what volatility is. In the chemistry sense, which of course is what we're talking about, it's basically the tendency of a substance to vaporize. So it's something like if you've ever seen, just like an alcohol, for example, that evaporates really quickly, that's a very volatile substance, for example. Basically, that really doesn't apply to, what they mean, I think, by this is that it's dangerous or something like that. I mean, if you have a really volatile acid, it probably wouldn't be dissolving what its sort of host organism is. It would probably be dissolving, say, your eyes and your lungs if you're breathing it in and things like that. So that's sort of one incongruity that I noticed. Another one is the acidic hemoglobin. Okay, for those of you who haven't taken biology since grade 6, basically hemoglobin is basic. We'll start from the beginning. How about hemoglobin is basically it's an iron-containing oxygen transport protein, and it's present in all of the red blood cells in all vertebrates. So we know that this is functioning somewhat like the vertebrates on our planet because they specifically say that it's hemoglobin. So we can sort of pin down things and nail them for that. Now, with hemoglobin, it is basic. Now, there's this thing called the Bohr effect, Bohr, which is something that a physician named Christian Bohr discovered in the early 1900s. And this guy isn't to be confused with Niels Bohr, who won some Nobel Prize for atomic structure and quantum mechanics or anything like that. They are both Danish, and the last names are both spelled the same, but the Bohr that we're talking about actually talked about this physiological phenomenon, which is where basically as you increase acidity in the bloodstream, it actually increases the amount of oxygen uptake. So, okay, basically what we're looking at here is as carbon dioxide dissolves in the blood, it mixes with the water with water that's in your blood to become something called carbonic acid, which is pretty nasty. This is one of the things that we see in things like acid rain and whatnot, and in a reasonable concentration is something that you certainly wouldn't want to mess with. So as the amount of carbonic acid relative to the blood increases, you'll see a decrease in blood pH. This is basic acids and bases. So basically, as a decrease of blood pH occurs, or an increase of blood carbon dioxide, this will result in hemoglobin proteins releasing their loads of oxygen and decreasing, a decrease in carbon dioxide will actually increase the pH relative. So you're talking about like a relativistic kind of thing. Acids and bases is kind of give and take. If you've ever taken it I had to take it in grade 11 or 12, and then first year university. I haven't touched it since, but effectively what this is saying is that the more acidic that your hemoglobin gets, the more it's going to automatically counteract that and release oxygen and become more basic. So having this sort of, they're talking about this really, something so acidic that it's dissolving organic material right in front of their eyes. This would never happen in a normal hemoglobin system. It would never happen, and we do know that this is probably quite similar to what we see in vertebrates because they specifically said hemoglobin. So we know that this creature's circulatory system is probably working in a very similar way. So not only do we have this strange sort of volatile acid, but it doesn't evaporate, even though technically that's what volatile means, and it's acidic hemoglobin, which hemoglobin technically should be considered basic. It's one of the reasons why our blood is slightly basic, for example. So we could assume that it works in a very similar way in the Mutalisk. So this is something that I mean, with just a little bit of knowledge, these three words together just do not make sense. And I mean, it's really quite funny to me because they have this great resource called Anatomy of StarCraft, where they could send me an email and say, "Hey Steve, what do you think of this?" And I could say, "Okay, well here's, let me Google that for you," and we can go from there. Now, the way that we can make something like this work, this whole the study keeps dissolving right in front of their eyes. Imagine, if you will, the carbonic acid that we talked about has an active uptake method, so they're actually storing this carbonic acid actively. So I guess you could say that carbon dioxide rich blood goes through several different organ systems in a certain area that could be widespread and very small throughout the body, and it stores it up. Why would this be important? Well, basically, if you're doing something like we've hypothesized in Anatomy of StarCraft before, where you're constantly shooting out these creatures from your digestive tract and they're being stored in your stomach and all that, the glaive worms, for example, you're going to want to have a really awesome way of obtaining more acid with less effort, basically. So this is a really good way to do this, and it actually helps with cellular respiration as well by removing that carbonic acid and storing it up. So what you see is basically when these creatures die, they're effectively booby-trapped, like they talk about. They dissolve, and like, for example, if they get shot down out of the sky over top of submarines, well, they're going to get rained down with some concentrated carbonic acid. So this system actually makes more sense, both physiologically and logically, as far as actually, making this idea of this body sort of evaporating before them with all this acid, right? And that also applies. I mean, okay, so like, let's say these things, the Mutalisk dies, something happens, and then now all of a sudden it's quote volatile acidic hemoglobin causes them to dissolve. What's going on here? Well, I mean, if we actually consider things like the mammalian or vertebrate stomach, that is actually like a ridiculous pH of like 1, like super acidic. You don't want to dip your hand in that at all. And the inner linings of the stomach constantly sheds, and if there's a problem with that, you can get an ulcer or a bleeding ulcer where it like blisters and it's really nasty, and if it ever spills out into your body, you go septic and it just wrecks your day. Getting shot in the stomach is one of the worst places to get shot. I mean, other than the head and perhaps the heart. It's really quite painful, as I understand it. So the issue that I'm finding is, in order to have volatile acidic hemoglobin, and I can't say that without doing those little quotation marks because it's just so ridiculous, the whole circulatory system would need to be constantly shedding its inner lining, which is something that we're not seeing as far as the efficiency goes of Mutalisks, in particular the new Mutalisk, which has the rapid tissue regeneration or whatever it's called. I mean, to me, this is just a repurposing of metabolism, so they're not flying around as much. They're not like shooting out and creating more of these glaive worms and things like that. And they actually divert some of their bodily functions into repair. And they do this on a much greater scale than something like, say, a human could do. But anyway, that would actually detract from that idea that they can do this sort of rapid tissue regeneration, because it's constantly leaching from a set of resources that they don't have a whole lot of, because we never see them eat. We presume that they do, but if the lore is all right and all squared away, I mean, there's a big hole there as well. So I think the best way to go about thinking about this, I know it's something minor and like a lot of you probably haven't read it, but it does, sort of, these sort of things can snowball into the game where you have like the rapid tissue regeneration suddenly doesn't make sense. And the speed at which they fly suddenly doesn't make sense. And the ability to produce glaive worms suddenly doesn't make sense. And it's really hard to reconcile all this, especially because apparently the people that are writing this don't know how to use Google. I mean, it's quite frustrating, and I would be more than happy to help them out in future projects. And Blizzard, I know you watch the series. We all know you watch the series. You've linked to it several times. I would very much so like a response from you, be it on the forums or directly via email at mrstevo@hotmail.com, mrstevo@hotmail.com. You can reach me directly. Basically, I'd love to help you guys. So. And we can we can get this sort of peer review before you publish something and end up putting several feet in your mouth. I mean, not one part of this thing actually makes sense. I mean, hemoglobin itself isn't volatile. Maybe blood serum is a little bit more volatile, but like hemoglobin certainly isn't, especially when it dries. Dried blood is like 70% or more of hemoglobin, right? So, and red blood cells. So, yeah. Anyway, that's my little rant about. And I wasn't going to get into Project Blackstone, but I've been sucked in by an extremely derpy line, or set of lines and things like that. And there's one more thing in the same. This is the Mutalisk letter thing, I guess. Anyway, right at the end, they talk about what could an archaeologist possibly contribute to a research lab devoted to alien biology. How about nothing? Unless you're talking about something like a zoo archaeologist, which studies things like, say, like horse butcher sites and things like that, and like the animals that were directly interacting on a regular basis with the societies that they're studying. Yeah, I think what they may have meant to say was paleontologist, those are the two most commonly mixed up things in the human language as far as I'm concerned. It's just ridiculous. The English language, the human language, whatever. Screw you. Anyway, basically, I don't get it. I really don't. And yeah, leave your questions, comments, and stuff below, your ideas and stuff. I mean, if this was too complicated, I really hope it wasn't. But you can look up all of this stuff. Bohr effect, Bohr effect. You can look up volatility. You can look up hemoglobin. This stuff is all extremely common to find. I mean, unless you dropped out of school at grade 6. Yeah. Anyway, this has been Panera with a little rant about this Project Blackstone stuff. So I guess I'll catch you guys next time.